In the issue of the presidency, the president has diplomatic and military powers that we'll discuss here in this section. First thing I want you to do is take a look at this video from Crash Course and help you give an idea of what we're going to talk about, fill in some of the blanks of some of the things that I don't have a chance to describe in more detail. So one of the privileges that the president has here in these powers is the ability to make treaties. It is important that you note that treaties are very formal agreements between two or more sovereign states, and the president is the only one with the ability to help negotiate and create those. He may send ambassadors or send representatives to go negotiate on his behalf. But according to the Constitution, Congress is not the one that's going to negotiate. Now, Congress will have to approve all treaties, and these treaties can cover a variety of different subjects, anything from national defense to trade to environment to travel, all those type of things. And the president then has to negotiate with other countries and then put it together for the Senate to approve. 2/3 of the Senate has to vote in favor of this treaty before it will go into effect. Treaties here have the same weight in our legal system, the same enforcement as what a law passed by Congress would have. And it is important that none of the treaties have any conflict with laws that are already in place that Congress has passed. And so if that were to happen, the courts would enforce whichever one was passed most recently. And so the president has the ability to do this. The president can also make executive agreements. So executive agreements are less formal than a treaty, and it's a pact here between two leaders of nations or perhaps representatives of the nations that are sent by those leaders. And they make an agreement here without a formal treaty. The executive agreements are legally binding, and they are enforced by the courts. They do not require approval of the Senate, however. And so many presidents opt for the executive agreement option instead of the treaty because it does not require as many hoops to jump through. Most of these do not contradict any act of Congress here, so we don't really have to worry about that. But we do have executive agreements with many nations that are not full-fledged treaties. We do try to honor those as if they are treaties, just they're not quite as strong and bonding as those treaties are. The president also has the ability to recognize other nations as states. And when the president recognizes this country, there are a number of things that happens. Usually involves exchanging ambassadors. And so we will welcome their ambassadors to our country, and we will also send ambassadors to theirs. And the United States does refuse to recognize several countries around the world. You can look those up. I'm sure you can find those on Google pretty quickly. But when we do recognize governments, it can be a valuable way of supporting young or weaker governments, especially if they're in the course of some sort of conflict. If we take an ambassador out of a country, or we withdraw our recognition of a country or a nation, that can put a lot of political pressure on them. It's usually a pretty big deal when a nation of our size does this and takes this action. It sends a statement to the rest of the world. And so recognition power is an important aspect of the president's responsibility. The president also has military power. Although the Constitution puts the Congress in charge of declaration of war, the president has at his disposal the military powers as commander-in-chief. But it does not specify whether the president should be the top general that takes orders from Congress or as an independent authority. So the president often has taken this as the ability to send troops into combat even without congressional approval or declaration of war. And so they will often go ahead and send them in and call it a conflict or call it a police action, or simply they may just say, well, this is an undeclared war. We're going to send so many thousand troops in to help with this situation. And Congress is sitting back wondering, is this a declaration of war, or do we need to take action or not? And so because of the ambiguity here, the president does need to address Congress and let them know what's going on. So The video, I believe, talked about President Johnson and how right after Vietnam, Congress tried to incorporate the War Powers Act, which tried to shift the balance here of power between executive and legislative branches. I'm not going to go into huge detail on that right now, but the president does need to effectively communicate to Congress. And Congress typically consents to most of these operations. Most of the time they will support the president unless they have a strong reason not to. Many times they may not come out and say, we support it, we would embrace this, but they will fund it. And if they allow money to go to pay for this effort, then they are silently approving of all of this. Sometimes they may pass a resolution that is short of a declaration of war, but it's a resolution stating their approval or their position on the issue.